Hi, podcast audience. If you love our show, will you help us? If you're already a member, spread the word and ask a friend to join you in membership. And if you're a first-time listener, become part of our patron community. Patrons receive extra content, behind-the-scenes research, and more. Become a patron today for as little as $3 a month at patreon.com/The LF Show. That's patreon.com/The LF Show.
Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is The Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real-life models of shifting power from the few to the many in the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, and governance. New York, New York. It's a city with close to a $100 billion budget every year and one deputy mayor with some pretty creative plans for how to spend it. What can one city do? And what's it going to take to create a non-racist democracy? J. Phillip Thompson, New York City Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, is my guest for the entire program.
Economic democracy was actually the original American dream, and the slave owners overturned it. Economic democracy was part of the Civil War and part of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and the restoration of the Confederacy overturned it.
That's this time on The Laura Flanders Show, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. Welcome. Former Mayor Michael Bloomberg once famously said that it would be a godsend if he could lure every billionaire in the world to New York. That spoke volumes about his approach to city development. Mayor Bill de Blasio's approach has been very different, at least at the level of rhetoric. The city's annual budget is larger than that of every state in the union, except perhaps California and New York State. This year, the metro area is expected to bring in some $92.2 billion in revenue, and de Blasio's administration has pledged to use that to foster economic democracy and close the gap between rich and poor. So, how is the administration doing? What are the challenges that they face? And what can cities reasonably be expected to accomplish? Joining us is someone who, as they say, is in the room as the decisions are being made. Fresh from a starring but all too short appearance on this show last month, I am happy to welcome back New York's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, J. Phillip Thompson. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
You were a hit on the Our Economy show, I just want to say. It has been seen globally, and I've gotten feedback. Who is that guy? How can we get him to come and work in our city? Talk about that Bloomberg approach and how it is different from yours. Luring billionaires hasn't been your strategic initiative.
The mayor believes, and our administration believes, that the past 30 years have been an economic disaster for the vast majority of American workers and communities. While corporate CEOs' income have disparities, their workers have gone from 30 to 1 to 300 to 1 on average. The vast majority of workers haven't seen their incomes improve at all in 30 years. And last year, about 1% of New York's population earned over 40% of all income for every family in the city.
So. But what Bloomberg was saying was not unique to him. A lot of people believe people with money make money. Money trickles down. You want to bring the billionaires because they'll make jobs and spread cash around. Is that not what happens?
Well, the finance sector has gone from 7% of the economy in the 1970s to over 40% now. And the economy is in what mainstream economists call slow growth, and has been for a very long time. And this is despite $27.8 trillion the federal government pumped into the economy 2007, 2008 to now to try and prop up the financial sector. So the bottom line is, if workers are consumers, if they're not doing well, the economy's not going to do well. Now, the finance sector may find ways to enrich themselves and charge people a lot of money for everything from even accessing their money, $3 to go to an ATM machine. It costs them pennies to actually issue that money. But we should not confuse what happens on Wall Street with how the economy is functioning overall.
What is your approach? How do you do it differently? And haven't all the other initiatives kind of been tried?
No, they haven't. New York City has a roughly $50 billion in goods and services that we purchase every year. So we're working to actually use our procurement power to help create good jobs, to help reward and lure companies that treat workers well, to promote new forms of ownership of enterprise and ownership of assets where the owners are the communities and the workers themselves, so that distribution is more fair, more equitable, and that's good for the economy overall.
Now, how do you get around, because you're singing our song on this program, we've covered many cities that have been trying to do this kind of alternative model of development. And one of the things that they often run up against are competition rules that were not put in place by them, but exist, even at the level of the WTO, saying you can't discriminate against people who are hiring different sorts of folks, or companies coming from internationally. Like, you can't discriminate to favor the local. How do you get around those rules?
Well, in the case of minority and women-owned businesses, we actually do disparity studies. We actually show that there are certain kinds of businesses that, for historical reasons or because of discrimination, do not get contracts. And so that is the basis upon which we construct our MWBE programs.
And the localism part?
If you are a business in one of the 7 surrounding counties of New York City, you can be included in our minority and women business-owned program. But the logic is really simple, and that is 85% of our population in New York are women or people of color. Opening opportunities for these folks to have a business, to get a contract with the city, in the city where they pay taxes, in the city where they live, is actually fair.
Yeah.
The other thing is we encourage partnerships of MWBEs with companies in other places. We're encouraging joint ventures. We're encouraging companies that have good labor practices, good environmental practices, to come to New York, to bid in New York. One of the things we're working on internally is actually being able to identify companies that hire from our job training centers, that have collateral benefits, I call it, that actually are good citizens for the city, so that when a procurement officer says, look, here are 2 companies that on price are competitive, roughly, but this other company is actually hiring people coming out of Rikers, is actually hiring folks from our high schools, that has an additional benefit that another company that does none of those things doesn't have. So why don't we favor that company? So we're looking at changing our procurement rules to reflect our goals.
And you believe you can get away with that legally? I'm all for it. But
our lawyers think so.
All right, we'll keep at it.
The mayor and first lady announced J. Phillip Thompson as the city's new deputy mayor for strategic policy initiatives. Thompson will oversee many of the city's signature initiatives, including affordable housing, sustainability, education, and healthcare access.
Talk a bit about why you chose to do this job. You touched on it in your last appearance, but you were pretty happily ensconced doing thought leadership and practice in different places, doing field research, and yet you succumbed to Bill de Blasio's appeals and came back to New York City. Why?
I've known the mayor for a long time. We've talked about issues for a long time. He said, why don't you come to New York and make it a laboratory? Let's take some of these ideas and put them into practice and create models and kind of like spread the gospel. And I want that to happen in New York. So that's hard to turn down.
What are you most proud of having done so far?
Actually getting staff in City Hall and in the agencies to understand what's lacking in our democracy and understand why it's lacking and why economic democracy is actually a pathway, not only for improving our economy, but also improving and restoring our democracy. I think we're making progress on that. And I think that economic democracy was actually the original American dream, and the slave owners overturned it. Economic democracy was part of the Civil War and part of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and the restoration of the Confederacy overturned it.
So elaborate on that a little bit.
The 13th Amendment, which ended chattel slavery in 1863, also said no more involuntary servitude. Involuntary servitude in 1853 was also called wage slavery at that time. And the idea that a person should work for another person because they have no other means of survival, that was considered in 1863 involuntary servitude. And the belief was every worker ought to have 40 acres in rural area. 40 acres and a mule was a popular slogan at the time. That people thought was part of the 13th Amendment. It wasn't just about ending chattel slavery for black folks. It was actually uplifting all workers. That was the goal. all of those meanings of the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and so forth were overturned by a conservative Supreme Court and conservative government after the violent suppression of black folks who couldn't vote for 100 years, after the Civil War, of progressive whites who were imprisoned and also repressed after the Civil War. And then there was a movement called the populist movement, right on the heels of this, when poor white farmers, poor black farmers, again said, no, we want to fight for economic democracy, for equity, for freedom, for a chance, for ownership in this economy and all that. That is what led to racial segregation. When they ran a candidate for president in 1896 on a progressive party platform, populist party platform, the Supreme Court did Plessy versus Ferguson that literally used federal government to physically separate poor blacks, poor whites, and that is what created a national system of racial segregation. So this has been a fight over and over again, something the civil rights movement was fully aware of. The 1954 Brown versus Board of Education lawsuit, which brought about racial integration of schools. If you go back and read the NAACP's amicus brief, they said the reason we have racial segregation is to divide workers, poor white workers from black workers. That's why it exists in the first place. That's why we have to end it in schools. So this has been a long fight in America.
If you were to paint in broad strokes your initiatives today, what would you call them? How are they different from what we've seen before? And is it just a tweaking of the system that you're talking about, or a whole new system?
I think what happened with the New Deal, which was created actually in opposition, as you said, to this notion of laissez-faire capitalism or business can solve all problems, free enterprise will solve all problems, utter failure. The New Deal, though, made major compromises that actually I think we're grappling with to this day.
Mostly around race and class and gender.
Yeah, and particularly race. Black and Latino workers, agricultural workers, domestic workers were excluded from labor protections. Unionism, when it was built in this country, was done on a segregated basis in the main. So worker solidarity never really emerged. Martin Luther King in 1961 went to the AFL-CIO National Convention and said, I will end the civil rights movement. We don't need two movements of poor people fighting for the same thing. I'll bring 40 million black people into the labor movement. Then we can have our social democracy. Only 4 of 72 unions supported King in that. And we saw the labor movement decline steadily after that when Nixon and Reagan continued to use race to divide folks. And what is Trump doing now? Exactly that. Yeah. And so I think the problems that more public engagement, more public ownership, economic democracy have faced in this country from the beginning have centrally had to do with race. And now gender, to me, is a good thing. Women are beginning to say, hey, we want our rights in the economy as well as everywhere else. And so I think there's more opportunity now than ever before to maybe win on these issues. But we see Trump using the border crisis, immigration, everything in his power to try and resurrect and revive that traditional, narrow, racist, individualistic kind of approach to the economy. And he's a billionaire. Billionaires are going to be the saviors of poor white folks. Even though there's no basis in fact or reality about that, he appeals to people's emotions and that legacy of racism.
Yeah.
To say someone else is out to get something away from you, you're a hardworking, decent person, these other people are no good.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guest this time is J. Phillip Thompson. He's New York City's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. Some of you may remember he was featured in our special report, Whose Economy Is It? Ours was his answer. You can find that report at our website, lauraflanders.org. And if you've yet to subscribe to our podcast, do it there or through your favorite podcast app. If that app is Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate and review the show. It really makes a difference. It's invaluable to us in shaping the program. Next, I ask, just how does a deputy mayor with his kind of vast knowledge apply what he knows to fostering economic democracy in New York City itself? Real life, real time. He's got an answer. In the meantime, here's Be the Change by Mr. V featuring Michelle Rivera and Jaeden. It's part of the Earth Night 19 compilation that was curated by DJs for Climate Action, courtesy of earthnight.org, which is a global initiative harnessing the power of music and nightlife to celebrate and support action on the climate crisis.
Listen to the message. Hear the message from our future. From our future, yeah.
Climate change can drive as many as 1 in 6 animals and plant species to extinction.
Be the change. Be the change. You're the key. Be the change. Be the change.
There is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now that there has been in the last 800,000 years.
Be the change. You're the key. Be the change.
By the end of this century, over 150,000 people will have died due to heat-related causes.
Be the change. You're the key. Be the change.
How, with this huge expanse of both knowledge and perspective, do you seek to affect a city? And why do you think a city is a place of the kind of macro change that you're, I think, talking about?
Let me say, first of all, that I think cities are great learning laboratories. And almost the New Deal, before it became national policy, was local policy. It was Mayor LaGuardia. It was many other cities who had experimented with different ways to improve the economy, different ways to improve housing conditions, different ways to improve health conditions. So I think cities are that. Cities are where universities tend to be, where knowledge tends to be cultivated, developed. And so these experiments are scrutinized and evaluated, and then out of that come programs. So I think cities are great for that. The other thing I think is that thinking of the economy as somehow a system that has an internal logic that operates all by itself, separate from society and politics, is an illusion. Mm-hmm. And I think we've had enough experience around the world with various forms of socialism, various forms of capitalism, to actually say, for this kind of market or sector of the economy, say healthcare, this approach doesn't work well, this other approach does. In housing, structured differently, this kind of approach works well, we've seen this other approach doesn't. I think modern economies have to be approached that way. And what's most important is that the population is involved in setting goals. What do we want to come out of our economic policies, out of our government policies? And cities are the best place for local citizens to really engage in what it means to run and determine your own economic future, which is tied to your educational system, it's tied to your social welfare system, it's tied to everything else.
So how's that going here in New York? How are people participating? And do people feel, insofar as you're aware, that something different is going on?
We're talking to a lot of local groups in the city about how do we extend collective bargaining at the workplace, which has been around since the 1860s, to collective bargaining around consumer purchasing.
Like?
How do we bring communities and labor unions together to say, we're all buying cable TV, we're all buying cell phones, many of us are buying diapers. Why don't we all come together and negotiate with the internet providers, be they Amazon or big box stores and everyone else, to get those prices down and exercise that power as workers and communities together. And let's take a portion of that savings and use it for community organizing or to fund politics so that politicians don't have to go to wealthy donors in order to get reelected, but they can be more accountable to the people.
Now, this isn't just pie in the sky. You have experience of some of this, particularly around the kind of group purchasing.
Yeah.
Describe some of your, I don't want to call them experiments exactly, but experiences.
Well, this is something that is not new either. Jewish housewives in the Lower East Side 100 years ago started consumer organizing against kosher butchers who were overcharging for meat. And there are lots and lots of examples of this in the U.S. and all around the world. A bunch of folks in Boulder, Colorado, 15 years ago, 5,000 of them came together and bought cell phones. And they got $600,000 a year from a cell phone company for that collective contract. And 13 years ago, NYCHA residents tested the market. What if we bought cable together, public housing residents? They got offers of over $30 million a year from cable companies if they would just do that one thing. And so this is something that has been tried in many other places. I think with big data, with online purchasing, where the vendor companies, be they banks or MasterCard or Visa, they already have the data. They can tell any of us who buys what, block by block, where they buy it, when they buy it. That data can be a powerful organizing tool when it's in the hands of the people. So one of the things we're doing now is doing popular education. People need to own their data. 97% of Facebook's profits last year were selling people's data without their permission or knowledge. People need to own that data. It can be powerful. The digital economy can be used as a social and organizing tool, a liberating tool. It doesn't have to be just for corporations to extract. But we have to organize and educate ourselves to take it.
And we have to do it fast.
Well, that's right. New York City published a 2050 plan, one NYC, with 13 volumes of specific policy proposals and ideas about what should the future of transportation be in New York. How should New York deal with climate change? How should New York deal with affordable housing? How should New York deal with change in the economy? All that's written.
Yeah.
It was submitted to the UN, and it doesn't mean that these are the only ideas that make sense, but it means here's a vision for what urban America, for what cities around the world really ought to engage with.
2 last questions. The Green New Deal, some people are afraid that the right will seize on it and sell people on the idea that it is a stick to beat the poor with and small businesses, forcing landlords to pay enormous amounts to green their buildings, for example, costs that will be passed on to the occupants, or businesses, same thing. How do you address that? How do you do greening in a way that doesn't displace? And then the last question I have to ask you is about the budget for prisons and incarceration. The mayor's plan has $11 billion to keep Rikers Island, a former penal colony, alive and working till 2026. What's your alternative for that?
Well, on the issue of a Green New Deal or greening cities, climate change is happening. It's inevitable. New York City has over 500 miles of seawater coastline. The oceans are expected to rise at least 6 feet in this century. And so this is something we have to deal with. It's not a choice. We have to deal with it. We have to reduce carbon. We see the changes in climate. We see the changes in weather. Buildings are about 40% of our carbon load. Indian Point Power Plant is closing in a few years. That's 20% of our energy. We have to retrofit buildings. I think a lot of the reaction against this is because people it's not a system yet. How do you easily retrofit your building? It's not the money. It will pay for itself in reduced energy costs over time. But banks aren't used to it. Financial institutions aren't used to it. The companies that actually can do it, they're not here, or they're not many of them. Where's the workforce for this? How is this going to work? Germany created an agency to actually work on these problems, and they've been around for decades, and it's worked. So we have to do that in order to make this something easy and simple, logical for building owners, but the necessity is unquestioned. And I think it can create jobs for a generation. When we talk about these problems, America's infrastructure is crumbling. I read the National Association of Civil Engineers reports every year. It's not popular reading, but they're far more radical than AOC or anyone else who's talking about green, because they just detail all of our infrastructure problems that are happening. And they're calling for $5 trillion of immediate investments to maintain our infrastructure. Great opportunities for making New York more beautiful, for eliminating poverty in the course of dealing with these issues, for really engaging the citizenry together in a common effort and enterprise. It can be great for our democracy. So there are many upsides. As far as prison, I don't work specifically on this. My main goal with the mass incarceration is actually, let's create job opportunities for people who are at risk of going into prison, at risk of, or when they come out of prison. I mentioned earlier that 1 in 4 or so on our construction projects will be from vulnerable neighborhoods. The construction trades have created a program for people coming out of prison so that they can go in and become carpenters and other trades, and we need to do a whole lot more of that kind of thing. In terms of Rikers shutting down and building new prisons, most communities are accepting the construction of new prisons, but to me, That is the beginning. What we really need to focus on is how do we minimize the number of people who are in prison in the first place. When people are in prison, how do they learn how to reshape their lives? How do they get an education? How do they get mental health services if they need it? What's our vision for that? How can communities interact more with prisons? There's a prison in Alameda County, California, where it's totally off the grid. And the prisoners are trained on how to do green infrastructure work while in prison. And when they come out, they have marketable skills. How do we begin to do that in our prisons?
You mentioned Alameda. My last question, who do you call when you want an ear to talk to? Who are your allies globally or nationally who are doing this kind of work at the level that you are? Because I don't want to say you're pretty unique. I would say you are unique, but I'm sure you have allies and colleagues.
So for many years, I've worked with people in the Basque region of Spain. I have many friends in Britain. I've worked for many years with the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. I've worked in South America quite a bit. We had 30 businesses come from Colombia 2 weeks ago to partner with MWBEs here in New York City. And it's around the same framework. How do you avoid civil war reemerging in Colombia? Well, let's have economic democracy in Colombia. I work with Triodos in the Netherlands and Global Alliance for Banking on Values. It's in many continents now, and it's a movement amongst banks. How do we actually finance economic democracy? How do we make it transparent for banks so that people can see when you put a deposit in my bank, here's the company we invest in, here's what they pay their workers, here's how they treat the environment. Be responsible. Every dollar is like a vote. So how do you actually vote for what you believe in? I'm learning more every day. Cities around the world. Montreal has reached out. The new government in Mexico City, the chief of staff for the new president is Lázaro Cárdenas, who himself was governor of Michoacán, who is very much a believer in these kinds of approaches. Right. So I think there's a movement around the world that's underway. The U.S. is a little behind.
Well, you're cheering me up, and I thank you for that. And I will continue to cover what you're doing and what's happening in this city and the cities that you mentioned. Are many of them already on our map. So I encourage people to check out the continued reporting that we're doing here on economic democracy and community wealth building. And I want to thank you so much, Deputy Mayor
Thank you for having
Thompson,
me.
for coming. It's a pleasure.
Likewise.
That was J. Phillip Thompson, New York City's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. Listen, we have a community that supports this program at patreon.com/The LF Show. And we share with them everything we can that will help amplify the message and give more connection to the stories we air on this program. If you want to find out more about J. Phillip Thompson and his work, along with additional research that backed up this program, go to patreon.com/The LF Show. That's patreon.com/The LF Show. That's also where you can become a member of this community for as little as $3, $5, or $12 a month. It is your sustaining memberships that fuel us to be able to cover the issues we do without relying on government or corporations. So we want to remain beholden to you, not advertisers, and we need you to do your part. Help us reach a goal of 100 new supporters by the end of 2019. We're about halfway through. Thanks. This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, with Monica Mohapatra, Charlotte Carpenter, Nat Needham, Natasha Gaspar, Jeannie Hopper, Joanna Pinto, and Dominic Marcella. The Laura Flanders Show is made possible from the Novo, Ford, Tomcat, Cloud Mountain, and Fonda Foundations, as well as by listeners like you. So thank you. Stay kind, stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.